Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the show, dedicated to the craft podcast brought to you by Ballast Brewing Company. I'm your host, Jeff Lozano. And on today's episode, we are talking about our new release, our new beer releases. And I sit down with Aaron and the Chris's from the R&D facility in Little Italy so that we can kind of discuss everything that went into the development of the Brothers Gus. Two beers, one's a Hoppy Lager, one's an IPA, 4.2, 6.5, both crystal clear, both bone dry, both are battering rams of hoppy aroma, but they're clearly different. It's kind of cool what we were able to do, and we haven't released a beer in a little bit, but this launch is a true testament of our innovation and what Aaron and the Chris's have been able to come up with down in their little lab. It's been a year in the making. So for a little over a year, we had variants of it cycling through our tasting rooms until we kind of honed in what we were really looking for and what we were really comfortable releasing. And so they tell you all about on this episode, and it's beyond interesting. These two beers, they don't really conventionally fit into the categories that they represent, the styles that they represent. And I know it sounds weird, and you're going to hear things like clear, hazy IPA, but just sit through the episode, crack open a beer, and listen, because they have a lot to talk about. And it's so interesting thinking or hearing about what they were thinking about when they were coming up with these two brand spanking new beers. They're out in the wild. You can swing by our tasting rooms and pick them up. And not to say the least, the artwork is just incredible. Paul Elder really just outdid himself. He always does, right? But these two beers very particularly have this artistic flair that is everything that our company is all about. Complete art outside of the can, and then you'll hear about the art that went inside of the can. So enjoy. Pick up a couple of Wee and Big Gus's, pick them up together so that you can do a little compare and contrast any way you want to do it. Enjoy the episode, and thanks for tuning in. Gentlemen, thanks for jumping back on the show.
Great to be here.
There you go. I actually got it on tap. I have it on tap. So for anybody that's tuning in via Spotify or Apple Podcasts and you're not watching, everybody has pointed to their webcam with their beautiful Ballast Point Wee Gus. Brand new beer, guys. Brand spanking new beer. And it's been a while since Ballast Point has released something like really, really new into the market. And so I think a lot of excitement was starting to build up internally, especially over here at the company, wondering, hey, we have this R&D facility. And for anybody listening, you guys can go back and catch the episode that I did with Aaron, Chris, and Chris about the R&D facility, where we kind of talked about how they come up with new beers and the thought process that goes into it. But on this episode, because of this brand new launch that we're really excited about, we're hopefully we get an idea of what it was like to develop this beer, what you guys were thinking about, the things that you wanted to express through the beer, and the kind of like sit down at the table with you guys and figure out what it is that these beers are, because they're interesting. They're delicious, but they're interesting. And we released two of them at the same time, and we're calling it the Brothers Gus. We got Wee Gus and Big Gus. One is a Hoppy Lager and one is an India Pale Ale, but they contrast each other so beautifully, and it's by design. So I just want everybody listening to get a really good idea after the show about where this beer came from and what it's actually supposed to be.
That is a huge that's a broad topic.
I usually do that. Don't worry. It's meant to be broad, because there's a lot going on with these beers, man.
I think there is, and I think what we have to start off with is our main adage for a company that's been around for a long time, which is to brew beers that we like to drink, right? So let's just start with that. Yes, we have a sales and marketing team. and we try to have this symbiotic relationship with them. But it's not necessarily what completely drives the future of this company. And that's really important. Is first and foremost the discussion that we have on an R&D level is, do I even want to drink it?
Right.
So I think that's the start. And beyond that, so like you can say, oh yeah, gluten reduced and low calorie are hot, and seltzers are hot, and there's all these things, and and yes, at some point in the history of Ballast Point, we've had those discussions, but it's more also just this organic. Hey, we play around with raw materials. We have this idea. Let's do this idea, and if it's cool, great. Do people like to drink it? We like to drink it, and then we move from there. So I'll just kind of lay out that.
Right. Yeah. No. And it's good to shine or to color this with context, because that is a fundamental philosophy of not only our company, but it's very much the philosophy of the Little Italy R&D facility, which is the three of you. You guys are working with a 5-barrel system, and basically the MO is not only to create beers that you like to drink, but hopefully create something that's going to go into the market, right? And something that's going to be able to come out of Ballast Point on a whole and be new and exciting. And that's where we get these beers. Where did this start? Where did something like a bone dry, crystal clear Hoppy Lager, and then its counterpart, a bone dry, crystal clear, you probably can't even tell the difference between the two of them, IPA? How did that even get going?
Yeah, I mean, as Aaron said, I think it was just kind of us discussing what do we want to think? Idea, just sort of an idea. And I think all three of us probably remember where it came from a little bit differently. My recollection,
origin story, right?
Yeah, which is really fun. Which is really funny because like Chris and I have discussed this, where I think our memories of where we kind of started with these beers are not at all the same. And then, I mean, Aaron, obviously with background at Scripps too, has a different perspective on it. But my memory of it is kind of thinking of how we can push the limits with color in a beer, and how can we get a beer that's kind of messes with your eyes. It's one thing that I really enjoy doing is having a beer, because the whole adage that you eat with your eyes first is to make something that doesn't look like what you're expecting, or what your expectation of based on seeing it is totally mismatched with what you actually taste and smell. So it's basically, how do we get a beer that kind of looks like a macro light lager, but that has just a kind of an aggressive hoppy punch, is kind of what at least my recollection of what we were trying to achieve in the first place. Is basically something that's hoppy and really aromatic, but doesn't really look like it. Mm-hmm. And it kind of it's evolved a number of different times from that point. But it was for me, it was at the beginning, it was like, let's just see how pale we can get it.
No, and it is. It's the lightest thing. Chris, Hots. That's probably not how you remember it. But what was your thought?
Not too much differently, but it is different. I remember, kind of we always we made these two beers or came up with them in my memory while drinking beers, and it was kind of the antithesis of trying to create a beer that is the antithesis of a hazy. So let's make a hazy beer, but make it as clear as possible, as light in color as possible, but still have a lot of late edition hops in the whirlpool and in the dry hop, and so yeah, that was kind of how I remember it, and trying to get as much hop aroma into a beer that still is clear, and then creating that light color just to pronounce the clarity of the beer.
Right. So I think really quick, for anybody that doesn't necessarily know what the big difference is between, let's say, a hazy and a West Coast pale IPA, because what you were talking about right now is that you wanted to get a hazy IPA and then make it really clear, and that somebody's brain just blew up because they don't understand what that means. But there are certain characteristics and attributes about a hazy IPA that are not necessarily about its appearance, correct?
Yeah. So, I mean, haze comes from usually protein and polyphenols, and those come from malt and hops. And so hazies, to get them hazy, you use malt or adjuncts that are high in protein, and then you have really large dry hop additions. We're talking 3 pounds per barrel, or up to 8 or even 12 for a double hazy IPA.
Jesus.
So the more hops you add, the more polyphenols you're getting in there, and then using those adjunct malts like oats or rye or whatnot.
Quinoa. How about quinoa?
Yeah,
Quinoa, sorghum, or whatever.
Yeah. So by using those, you're getting more protein, and then you don't filter, and that's how you get the hazies. So we're still adding a large, dry hop addition or late addition of hops. So that's still adding the polyphenols, but we really cut down on the protein in these beers by using basically Pilsner malt, and then the rest of it is dextrose, which is just simple sugar that gets fermented really quickly and easily by the yeast, and it has no color. So you can really, and using enzymes too, on addition of that. So you can make a beer that's, for Wee Gus is 3.8% ABV, but add the enzymes and you get it up to the 4.2. But you can basically decrease the amount of malt you're using, so you can really decrease the color and make it really light in color. So when we made this the first few times at Little Italy, our dry hop additions were in the 4 pounds per barrel range, and it would actually have like a green tint to it from the hops.
Yeah. Well, now we're talking about both versions. When you say that, when you're talking about the amount of pounds per barrel when it comes to your dry hop, they both use the same amount per barrel.
These do not.
Big Gus is a little bit bigger.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll get to Big Gus, I guess. Yes. It's the bigger brother, right? So let's focus. I'll try to focus a lot more on the Wee Gus for right now, because man, this thing's effervescent. I mean, this thing is aromatically, it's very deceiving. Like to Chris Takichi's point, you get a little confused when you smell it, you look at it, and then you taste it. But that's the whole purpose. The whole purpose is that you guys ended up throwing a lot of, or all of the hops late, which is going to kind of present itself with a lot of those aromatics and hop profiles and like citrusy, juicy, but you don't get the bitterness from it, correct?
Yeah, this is not a bitter beer. So I tell my bartenders, if somebody says they don't like IPAs, give them this beer because they may very well like it.
That's the biggest connection for sure, is the low bitterness.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the idea of taking a hazy and making it clear. It's kind of the philosophy from hazies of having it be in your face hoppy, like really, really hop forward, but not bitter. Because hazy IPAs are designed to be aggressively hoppy, but not aggressively bitter. And that's just, it's not necessarily, it is partially how much weight of hops you use, but it's also when you use them. So the later you use them, the more aroma and flavor you get out of them, but the less bitterness. So yeah, it kind of try to tie all that together was kind of take that approach and use most of our hops as late as possible, and use a lot of them, but then make it clear.
Right. Yeah. And I think, and because you guys adjusted the protein content in the beer, you're not worried about it picking up haze. You're not worried about it having that polyphenol protein complex, and so you get a crystal clear beer, which this is. It's the lightest beer that we've made, at least on an SRM scale, correct?
And diluting protein also controls color. So in the kettle boil, you have the Maillard reaction, right, which are simple sugars and simple proteins binding together to produce flavor, but it also produces color. So if you dilute protein via sugar, you can also control color. And it will kind of lighten the body, so it doesn't have this kind of full mouthfeel. It's like you're chewing it like a stout.
Right.
Whereas or even a hazy, it's kind of chewy. Some of those hazies are, which kind of is cool. It's fun. That's why hazies became popular, because it's so different. This is the other end of the spectrum. Like you're saying, it's effervescent. It's crisp. It's super light. It doesn't sit in your stomach. You have one, and it's like you had a LaCroix or something like that, right?
Right,
right. Totally.
It's really cool.
But with flavor, with a lot of flavor.
One other, if I can interject there, one other thing that we experimented with this that has actually kind of, I think, changed a little bit of our mentality about our hot side processes, our actual brewing processes, is, I think it's kind of a rule of thumb in brewing to, if you use Pilsner malt as your base malt, you boil for 90 minutes because it's not kilned very much, and it has a lot of sulfur compounds in it that
right.
you need to boil off, DMS precursor. And so we decided with this one, because of Little Italy, we have a direct file kettle. Our boil is really aggressive. And so it tends to volatilize things really quickly. We decided with this one, well, it's Pilsner malt, but we're going to boil it for 45 minutes, just to actually, again, to reduce color, kind of having the goal in mind of how do we keep the color down.
Huh.
When you boil, you add color because you're basically just cooking things. You have Maillard reactions and all these things going on. You're caramelizing, and your wort gets darker. So we decided to try to short boil it to see, like, what can we get away with?
Interesting.
And that was just sort of in our process of developing these, is how short can we go with it? And we have had no DMS issues with it, and it was really cool that it went from here with a direct fire burner up to Miramar with a Calandria, where theoretically you're not scrubbing sulfur quite as aggressively. There's none. It's still equally clean.
Yeah, it's super clean.
Don't forget the experiment we did where we only did a 10-minute boil with a West Coast IPA.
Yeah, we've gone with a higher kiln base malt. You go really short. Yeah, and it's just sort of testing, like, this is when I started in the brewing industry, it was just sort of a base assumption that if you use a Pilsner malt as your base malt, you boil for 90 minutes. If you use, like a 2-row or something like that, you can do 60. But yeah, we've gone down to 15 and had no issues.
Whoa.
Because maybe, I mean, if it all volatilizes in the first 5 minutes or so, you're just burning time. So.
Right, and you're
condensing.
They're
compounds that are really hard because they're so volatile. It's really hard to measure. So it's hard to find a lab that can measure DMS and precursor. It's interesting. We reached out to this hop farmer that we're kind of doing a collaboration with, BGF Farms, and they have that because they want to measure sulfur compounds and thiols, which are sulfur-based compounds, and better understand how that equates to hop flavor. So we're hoping maybe we can collaborate with them and their machinery to kind of dive deeper into this, because it's all theory. And for us, at an R&D level, it's all about practice, empirical evidence.
Right.
Prove it. So the proof is
scientific
the pudding at the R&D facility. That's just the way that we look at it.
Well, you're also dealing with a beer that is very, it's basically open for scrutiny. It's so light. It's so basically it's a blank canvas. So if any of these imperfections do come up, they're blatantly obvious. And so the fact that you guys went the opposite direction with 100% base malt of Pilsner, where everybody, the everybody, all the professionals would tell you to go ahead and extend that. Boy, you guys actually, not only did you guys shorten it, you guys shortened it to shorter than what a regular boy would be, which is 60 minutes. And you guys were able to produce a clean beer. So that's, I mean, what kind of innovation is that? That's innovation on another level, dude.
Now our quality lab's gonna get a bunch of emails talking about DMS in our beer.
Don't say
We have a lot of cream corn in this.
all these guys, man. You're gonna see it on the message boards. Really? Because I get cream corn. It's like, no, you don't. No, you don't. And so I think another thing to kind of highlight is that all of this did not happen on a Tuesday. The discussion didn't happen on a Tuesday, and then you guys are bringing it on a Wednesday, and then we're going to market. This had a lot of different variations, correct? What kind of variations did Wee Gus go through?
Quite a few.
I mean, there were at least a half dozen, right? I mean, it was. I mean, the big focus, I think, was when we did like a kind of a blind trial where we made 4 batches that were all the exact. So it was 2 brews that we split in half, and then hopped each one of them differently. So it was kind of a 4-part trial, and then had all of them on tap at the same time, and had employees kind of give feedback and all of the brewing team and the production teams and quality team, and basically try to get as much feedback as possible to say, okay, here's all of our what kind of experimental hop combinations. Which one do you like? And
what an organic way of doing it.
Yeah.
Well, and we have a lab, such a robust lab team, that can set up sensory analysis of our beers. So we have Adam in the lab, and he's so methodical about how he does sensory. I mean, that's his forte right now. So he set up this tasting and tried to quantify what we liked and what we didn't like. So you have that element. So it's great to have that as kind of our supporting crew. But it's also just when did it start? I mean, like when we're talking about DMS, we were doing that and trying to disprove that over a year ago. Yeah. So really, when you think about like all the things that we do on an R&D level, is this collective knowledge. Right. And I can't even describe to you. I went down to Little Italy almost 3 years ago, and I've been with Ballast for almost 10 years. And in the last 3 years, I can't even describe to you how much I've learned in the last 3 years. That brewery, in conjunction with the 2 Chris's, has been just an incredible learning experience. So you want to geek out. You want to really geek out about beer and ingredients and processes. I would argue, and I mean, obviously I'm biased, but Little Italy, Ballast Point, Little Italy is the hub for innovation, not only within the company, but I would say at the very least we should be listed in the top 5 in San Diego, let alone maybe even the country.
Agreed. It's all right. You can say it, man. Hey, look, you guys work hard, but what you guys have done, here's the big thing. Experimenting is having the ability to experiment is key. But what you guys really have done is you spilled over. The R&D facility was trying different things, and then once you kind of debunk that first thing, and even if it's by accident, and you go like, oh, all that stuff that everyone was talking about in our industry, that doesn't necessarily apply in this beer or whatever. And then kind of like once you spill over, it's hard to bring it back and brew conservatively after that big kind of mind blown moment where you go like, wait a minute, this didn't apply. How true is this? Let's let's experiment some more. And what you guys have been able to do down in Little Italy is you've already gotten to that point where you want to push boundaries. You want to push boundaries, and these beers are kind of an example of pushing boundaries, because they're they're beers that you wouldn't just come up with. You wouldn't just brew, and you wouldn't just go to market with them unless you had a laundry list of, does this work? Can it work? Is it repeatable? Is it scalable? All of these other questions that you have in mind. And so like with Wee Gus, like back to Chris Tuckagee's point, you guys brewed 4 different versions. You split 2 batches and you hopped them differently, and you decided which one was the best. And what ended up being the best?
Yeah, well, first, the employees as a whole got to make that decision. And so the one that actually ended up being the most liked was the one that we kind of threw in there last minute as a combination. So it's Hallertauer hops with Northern Brewer. And, you know, it was kind of a joke when we came up with that idea. It
definitely sounds like a joke.
It was just kind of like, let's just see, you know, take 2 hops that you don't typically add together in the same brew, let alone in a dry hop, and see what happens. And I think the overwhelming majority of tasters just kind of thought it had a white wine-like character, kind of a floral character. And it was just kind of weird. And so every time you take a sip of it, you want to keep going back and trying it again.
It is. And I will say that as a company, we source a lot of German hops, Cali Kolsch and Longfin. Showcase our German hops. So, we were sitting around, we're like, oh my gosh, we have all these German hops. Let's just throw them in and see what happens. And it was a joke, but it was more of, okay, we're already doing all these other ones that we kind of already know are going to taste good. Let's just do this. Let's heavily hop with German hops and see what happens. And people loved it.
Well, were you guys surprised? Because I know I was surprised when I found out that it was these 2 particular German hops. Were you guys surprised how big of a punch that these hops could actually hit you with? Because there's a reason why they're not very commonly used in the dry hop.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of interesting for me because like as they were on tap and we were getting feedback, because I mean, you know, we're talking about how we were getting feedback from the whole company. Our retail wing is awesome for feedback because everybody who works in the front of house drinks a lot of beer, so they kind of know what's out there. So they give us feedback from that, and it kept coming back like, okay, it's really interesting. It's the German one because the other 3 had American hop combinations, and you know it does have a big aroma punch. It's kind of an unexpected aroma, but I actually think what may have come out of it was it's this particular beer having like that really like massive wallop of American hops is almost a little too much, and it needed something a little more delicate. That the base beer didn't quite warrant just this massive American, like really aggressive.
Right.
So it does have like a punchy hop aroma, but it's not like a haymaker. It's like kind of a gentle slap. Where it's like it's distinctly hoppy, but it doesn't have that like really aggressive pine and citrus, not like the orange citrus or like grapefruit. And it doesn't kind of carry that same impact on your palate. It's more kind of a delicate, but still aggressively hoppy, but not in the same way, if that makes sense. And it makes it more drinkable. Like it makes it, you know, you can, if you're grilling. I think we've talked about this maybe in all 3 podcasts we've done about a beer you drink when you're grilling, or when you're at a baseball stadium or something like that. And it's kind of a beer that you make.
Put you in that hop coma, because there's something about, and I've actually developed an immunity to this once when I started drinking like Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, right?
Right.
Remember, you get kind of this sleepiness because isop acid. I think it's isop acid that actually makes you sleepy, combined with alcohol. So you kind of get sleepy, and I'm not getting that from Wee Gus.
Oh, it picks me up, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm ready to do yard work.
Yeah. And it's
my My wife's gonna
Don't.
like,
Yeah.
You just signed yourself up, dude. It just became a lawnmower beer for you, dude, and you didn't even want that.
No, it is.
Good term, lawnmower beer. Totally.
Yeah.
Good
It is a
lawnmower.
lot more beer.
But it is funny, and that's a very interesting fact about what hops or particular characteristics of a heavily hopped beer, what kind of side effects they might have. But the fact of the matter is that this is spritzy. This is light, and it's when you guys were devising different variants of this beer, and it had some very funny names, but they were all kind of along the lines of, this is spritzy, this is very carbonated, it's supposed to disappear, it's not lingering, it's not compounding in your mouth, you're not chewing on anything. This is gonna be one sip, it's gone, the next sip, it's gone. And what's nice about this beer and why you can drink it all day is that it doesn't have this compounding effect, and I think it has a lot to do with the body that's non-existent essentially.
This beer is a lot like a seltzer, but it's still a beer.
Remember
Yes.
when we entered, the name of the beer that we entered into JBF, because we had done a collaboration with YCH, and the name of the beer was definitely not a seltzer.
I
We
remember
wanted
that.
so badly for it to win at JBF, just to make a statement.
Right.
And hey, I know seltzer drinkers. I accept them. They're different. They're a different breed, but it's all about life choices, right?
Well, they're popular for certain reasons, and I think with this
I get
beer, you hit those certain reasons.
That's true.
Now, the only thing that would separate this beer from your stereotypical seltzer is that artificial fruit kind of component that a lot of people like. I like it in candy. I like Jolly Ranchers. Being an artificial fruit component is not a bad thing, if that's what you're in the mood for at that particular time. But what you guys were able to do with this beer is it has all of the components that are refreshing about something like a seltzer, yet it's still beer. You don't drink this and you go, oh, this is a seltzer. You don't drink it and go like, wow, look at this big beer. You're in limbo a little bit and you're a little confused. In the best way possible.
That's what we're trying to hit.
Yeah.
I think we should approach, or we should get into its big brother. But before, while you pour open the Big Gus and we talk about that, a little bit about the yeast that we use in Wee Gus, because one's a Hoppy Lager and one's an IPA. What are the yeast characteristics in Wee Gus?
So Wee Gus uses it's a Bach yeast, German Bach lager yeast. It's from White Labs, our friends at White Labs, up the road from here. And it's kind of evolved into our house yeast, just given its versatility. We've had a lot of good luck with it. We've been using it for a while down here. And it's got a good combination of being a very clean lager yeast, with proper treatment, of course, because it's a lager yeast. But it also is a workhorse, so you can harvest it a bunch of times. Granted that at an R&D facility, we're making a lot of different things all the time, so we want to try to find yeast that can handle kind of whatever we throw at it. So this yeast can handle a high octane too, but it's great because it can do that. It can ferment out a Baltic porter and not give you any yeast stress flavors. But it can also do a completely naked 4%, American lager.
Right. Yeah.
So basically, the idea was in this beer, we don't really want to have any noticeable yeast character at all. Mainly, so the hops are in the front.
Well done.
Remember our pain, and anyone listening to this podcast probably loves Fathom IPL, because we get a lot of people talking about Fathom IPL.
Oh yeah. Yep.
When are we going to return it? But the pain, the blood, sweat, and tears of trying to coax German lager yeast to ferment out a high alcohol beer that's heavily hopped.
Right.
They don't like alcohol. They don't like hops. and it was just a nightmare. And
these are toxic environments.
they're
This
toxic
organism.
environments. And so when you think about that on an R&D level, we methodically, and this is before my time down at Little Italy, methodically worked our way through lager yeast to find which one is going to be the best one for higher alcohol and hops. So again, it goes back to, where did these beers come from? It's like tier on tier, just this we're building this knowledge over years. The R&D facility has been around for over 7 years, and that's a lot of knowledge.
Yeah, and you guys do such a good job of data collection and making sure that it's archived somewhere so that in a split second you return to it and you say, did that work? Remember, did we do this once? Let's check. It didn't work that time. We can skip the trial on this one, or we can reapproach it differently, and it's just become this beautiful archive of different, basically, things that you liked, things that you didn't. And this is where these beers come from. We liked them, and so let's run with it. Now, we just cracked open a Big Gus, which it's in the Brothers Gus. It's the big brother. We're looking at a 6.5 India Pale Ale, which I poured both from the tap, and I had to label them, which is funny because the one's a 4.2 Hoppy Lager, one's a 6.5 IPA, and sitting on my desk, I had to label them because they look so similar. I mean, you wouldn't be able to pick out one from another visually. And that's kind of cool too, because it kind of goes back to that fun that you're having with kind of tricking your senses, but it's a fun way of playing with what we can do with beer. So what's up with Big Gus, and how does it play into our portfolio?
Well, I think kind of speaking about Wee Gus, how the base beer of Wee Gus maybe didn't support American hops just because it needed something a little more nuanced and a little more delicate. Just the extra, I mean, it's not really a different grain bill. It's just the same, more or less the same thing ramped up to the mid sixes alcohol wise. Just that extra 2% and change gives you enough body that now you can bring in a bigger hop punch. That it just supports a more aggressive, kind of more interspaced hop profile.
Dude, this smells good.
Yeah, Amarillo and Mosaic and Cashmere. Cashmere is kind of a new hop that this beer is introducing into our portfolio, which is cool. This gave us a platform to try to bring another new hop into our large scale portfolio. It's Irish ale yeast, so it's the same yeast that we use in Passing Haze. It's kind of where we started using Irish ale yeast in our portfolio. So it's kind of cool. It's a couple new raw materials for us to play with. It's still sort of the same approach that Hots was talking about, taking a hazy and making it clear. It's all late addition, so you're getting kind of maximal aroma and flavor punch on your hops, but not an over the top bitterness.
Well, here's a question for all the brewers to know. You just mentioned that you use the Irish ale yeast, which we use for Passing Haze, which is a very hazy beer. Now, you're using the same yeast for something that you want completely clear. And a lot of brewers want, low flocculating yeasts, something that's going to stay in suspension for a little bit longer. What was your thought process of making a beer that's supposed to be so crystal clear with a yeast strain that you guys are using for a very hazy beer?
Well, it's as Hots was explaining earlier, that your haze is formed by protein and polyphenol. If you have a lot of suspended yeast, eventually the yeast is going to drop out because that's just what they do, except for stuff like Hefeweizen yeasts that are basically don't flocculate at all. So if you leave yeast in suspension, it will fall out and it will drag everything with it. So you can have suspended yeast actually clarify your beer over time. So when we were developing Passing Haze, we wanted to actually have a highly flocculent yeast so we could get rid of it, so it wouldn't clarify in the package. And that was based on trials. We used a bunch of less flocculent yeast and found that those beers were going clear earlier than the ones that we used a highly flocculent yeast, dump the yeast off before adding the dry hop to actually produce the haze. So Passing Haze, all of the haze in that beer is entirely from from malt and hops, and it's not from suspended yeast. So that makes it so you can easily take that yeast and put it into a clear beer too, because it'll flock out and you can dump it.
Nice. And that aids in its overall flavor. This beer is amazing. It's weird. It's a very strange beer, just as Wee Gus was, but this one has a very confusing aroma for what you actually swirl around in your mouth.
Well, and for us, it goes back to the hops, and we have farmers that grow our Amarillo. So for people at home that don't know the recipe of Sculpin, it's no surprise. There's a lot of Simcoe and a lot of Amarillo. And so we work with grower direct, straight to the farm, talk to them about what we want from our Amarillo, and we select that. And we hand select our Mosaic. And, the Mosaic it's going to be heavy-handed. We usually try to target our Mosaics to be a little sulfur heavy, because if you think about these tropical fruits like guava, a lot of that dankness or these sulfur qualities are exactly that. They're sulfurs. So we always want the Mosaics that kind of hang on the vine a little bit longer. The sulfurs are some of the latest things that develop as hops are growing. So the longer they sit on the vine, but there's this kind of point where if they sit on too long, then it just smells like freshly cut garlic, which is not pleasant in beer. So you have to be really careful. So the way that we source our Mosaics, it's that balance point. So there's that, and of course then you have Cashmere, which we're hoping to work with farmers. It's a public variety, so it's not this proprietary hop variety. So we can kind of focus our attention going forward and trying to source some Cashmere. And Cashmere, again, it goes back to R&D facility, and we played around with Cashmere. And we were thinking, holy smokes, this hop has a future, which is great. Farmers like to grow Cashmere, and I personally see a future.
Yeah, you see a lot more breweries around here using them. Like Anthony over at Latchkey, shout out. He uses Cashmere left and right. I think Idaho and 7 and Cashmere, that's his thing. But he's learned how to express itself the way that you guys have been able to express it here, because these are big, bold hops that have room to stand on by themselves. And you are able to kind of showcase a well-balanced medley in a beer that could easily be overwhelmed by even a single hop. It's great, dude. This is punchy. Really it's punchy.
Yeah, it's fun to do both of them side by side, because it is like I can smell it.
Yeah, they look totally the same, and they're completely.
Yeah, it's right over here, and I can smell it. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And as the beer sits, because of its thinness, the CO2 continues to just bring up all of these volatiles and bring them out. I haven't lost aroma in this beer. It just doesn't lose it.
It has a little bit more viscosity from alcohol. I can definitely detect a little bit more of a warming and mouthfeel just from alcohol, which is really interesting. It's fun to do them side by side.
Right.
It's kind of a fun
definitely
experiment.
should. This is a beer.
Sometimes I kind of blend the two.
Ooh.
I like blending beer, so I think it's fun.
I might do that right now. This is a beer very specifically was the release simultaneous. It is a beer that you're supposed to contrast, and it is a beer that you're supposed to have fun with and play around with, mix it and dose it as you wish. But the main thing was for us to be able to give you, without listening to this podcast, give everybody a sense of what kind of things can happen when you start really knowing your raw materials and your processes. Hots, you were going to say something.
Oh, I was just going to say we did up the carbonation on both of these beers from what our normal production is. So normally most of our beers come in at 2.5 volumes, or actually, 2.65 volumes. And we brought this one up to about 2.8. So it is it is going to be more carbonated, and it's going to be spritzier, and that brings out the aroma.
Is that primarily why you guys did that? Is so that you can express the aromatics longer or more vividly?
That, and I think at Lily, our R&D beers, we typically go on the high side.
Yeah.
Because that's what we like. Yeah.
I'm gonna blend the two right now because Aaron, the Truth Justice, just gave me the idea, and I can't do it. As I do this, I think it's important to point out that this kind of beer, although it's very, very new for our mega release, when I say go to market, they fall in line with what you guys have been doing down in Little Italy forever, which is, you think Ballast Point, and then hold on.
That was a good crack. No,
I was kind of impressed too, man.
Off mic, it was good.
The ringing of the gong.
Good mic.
Yep.
And what a lot of people don't necessarily, I don't know, it depends on why you're at one of our locations, let's say, but people have a preconception about what Ballast Point is and what we produce, and we've done a good job of being a very broad spectrum portfolio, so it's kind of hard to pinpoint what it is that we are really good at, but we're good at hops. And if you look at what we're able to do with hops and the way that we're able to express different characteristics of them when we want, these two beers really showcase what we're able to do with not only hops, but how we're able to balance them in with something that would be probably ill-advised to do. Like, hey, let's put a bunch of Mosaic, Cashmere, and Amarillo into a bone-dry, very light-bodied, zero-bodied beer, but you're able to do it. And I think it's interesting. And I don't know what my palate is thinking right now. It's like I'm confused, but I'm confused in the best way possible.
Well, trying to enter this beer into a category for competition has been a challenge. Hots can attest to this because we're tasked with trying to enter into the category. So, Chris, what do you want to enter this beer into?
Yeah, how does it get classified? You tell us.
You basically have to just go through, read all the categories that you think it could fall under, and then just taste it while you're reading those, and just whatever one if it falls under. Because Wee Gus it's not an IPA, it's kind of a session IPA, or is it Pilsner, or is it contemporary Pilsner, New World Pilsner? There's all these categories that you could place it under, and it's quite the task, and that it just goes to show too that you can make an awesome beer that doesn't do very well at competitions because it just doesn't fit that category, and I know a lot of breweries that make awesome beer that just don't do well in competitions because their beer just doesn't fit into those predefined boxes. What a
great point. I think that's a very, very important point. And I think that if you didn't know any better, you could get stuck in this Brewing 2 category hamster wheel where with recognition comes a lot of accolades, right, and consumership and stuff like that. So you tend to want to make sure that you place somewhere in these big competitions, and we've placed a lot of them, but it's just because our beers have happened to fall into a particular category, right? Now, I think
strategically, it goes back to what Hot said. Strategically, it's finding it a home. Let's not forget that even like Sculpin is the king of international pale ale, because when you read the descriptors of that beer style, it's just magical. You're like, that's Sculpin. It totally makes sense. So, and then I don't want to go too far into competitions, but then it becomes, you've got a flight of beers, you got 10 or 12 of them, and then it just boils down to which one tastes the best. And for this beer, I think a lot of people, it's important to talk about, but I think a lot of people will look at that and think, and they taste it and think, oh, that's not an IPA. Because they have these preconceived ideas of what an IPA should be, but technically, the IBUs are an IPA. The hop aroma is an IPA. So I don't know. It's going to be really interesting because I've already had that feedback. Oh, this is not an IPA. It's like, it's pretty darn close to what people think of as a brute IPA, but less bitter. So I think that would be the best way to describe it.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. Chris, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, if I can interject there, I one thing that I love about both of these beers is that they kind of gave us a challenge as brewers. Like everything about them, like we were talking about DMS scrubbing and the short boil. There was a lot of things that we kind of had to figure out, like how, okay, when you're brewing, and one thing that you have your eye on when you're writing a recipe is keeping color down. It's not really a mindset that you're generally in as a brewer of what are all the things that we do as a technical brewer that add color, and how do we avoid them? Can we avoid them? Can we keep them kind of like, can we shorten the boil? Can we actually get away with, like, how low can we go? When you're basically your governing principles are totally different. But then to take that from here, where we can play with that on a 5-barrel scale, and if something that we try fails, it's not really that big a deal.
Right.
Like, that one's DMS loaded. Maybe we don't serve that one. We dump it. You can't do that at Miramar quite as easily. So the fact that this beer went to Miramar and they were able to take all of the little challenges that we had. One thing this is kind of nitty gritty brewing, but Wee Gus has such a small grain load to it that it can give you a lot of problems because there's not enough weight,
exactly,
in your grain bed to lauter properly. So we had to pretty early on. We realized, ordinarily you're doing you're adding 3-to-1 water to grain. So that's the water to grist ratio is the weight of water to weight of grain when you're brewing. And you kind of want to have a certain amount of volume in your mash tun so that you can lauter properly. We had to go to 4-to-1 immediately because there wasn't enough pressure and enough feed basically to get the wort to run off. And so to take that and to have Tom and Jack and Brandon at Miramar take that idea and have to scale it up to a totally different system, where all of the brew house is totally different, their clarification processes are totally different, and to take that and run with it and make it as good as well as it came out, like on a completely different scale.
Wow,
it's really cool. Like it's really cool that it was something that tested us. It probably tested them. I kind of hope it tested them.
It sure did.
Brewer, when you're encountered like with something that you aren't expecting and you have to figure out how to execute on it. I love it. I love that it translated. Like it went. They always translate, but this one had its own unique challenges.
Yeah.
That they had to figure out how to execute on, and it went. It's awesome. It went really well.
It's beautiful for not only the industry, because we've been able, through those trials and tribulations, through these practices of trying to push boundaries, you become a better brewer inadvertently of itself. You naturally emerge a better problem solver, a better mechanic, a better brewer. And then at some point you hope, for a lot of people, they are able to live their dreams of going out there and starting their own brewery. And we have a lot of alumni that have done exactly that. And sometimes a lot of their expertise or something that they're toying around at their own brewery has only become even faintly recognizable because of what was brewed down in Little Italy and had to and scaled up, right? So not only for the industry is it good that you guys are pushing these boundaries, but for the consumer it's good that you guys are pushing these boundaries, because I do think like a beer like Wee Gus, for instance, that says Hoppy Lager. It can be very misleading for somebody who's had a Hoppy Lager that was not this. Let's say a bigger body. Let's say that the brewer wasn't necessarily aware of the fact that it's such a hostile environment for such a delicate yeast strain, and just didn't have the time to be able to play with that. The consumer might have an idea of what this could be. But Wee Gus, for instance, is a beautifully effervescent beer, bone dry and refreshing, and it's a hoppy lager, and it's kind of throwing everybody, like, at least it threw me for a win, because after IPL, the IPL craze, I was like, man, we need some work on this particular style because somebody needs to figure it out, and you guys kind of did with this. Props.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Yeah,
I should add that we're an open book. You know, it's not like anyone that we talk with in the industry. If they have any questions, we'll answer those questions. And a lot of what we discover are published. And we go to conferences. You remember conferences?
Yeah.
People sat in a room and they stared at you. Sit there and stare at you, and then you would get up there and be all nervous. Remember those?
Dude, I remember. Hold on, real quick. Hold on before. And hold your thought. I go to Sierra Nevada. Me and Aaron and Matt Gallagher, our lab guy. We go to Chico, and you were presenting at the Master Brewers Conference. It was the winter session, and you were talking about all the research that Ballast Point had done on IBU pickup in the Whirlpool. Yep. And you went up there and you gave a beautiful talk and explanation about how much we pick up and this and this and that. And it was so funny to see some of the best brewers in the nation kind of raising eyebrows and going like, what? And well, that's interesting. Like to have some of the most accoladed brewers saying, that's interesting for something like IBU pickup in the Whirlpool is amazing. And I felt like, oh my God, people were it was such a beautiful transfer of information, whether they applied it or not to their own spot. It was nice to sit there and go like, that's our guy, Aaron, school and
showcasing
it was cool.
Everything.
And showcasing what we did.
And
it was
here's the book.
Beautiful.
Open up the book. And, previously we were under different ownership, and I won't go into that, but, some people in the room were kind of.
Oh yeah, there was like order.
What is this guy? No, and it was like, here it is, and then I had those very individuals coming up to me and saying, hey, that was really awesome presentation, and it reestablished this camaraderie that is the brewing community, and I think people forget how invested we are as a company in giving back to the community, and it's always been important to us, and what they can bring to the table to us, we learn from them as well, and I love it. It's a warm fuzzy moment, and I agree. That was really fun conference, and so you can always reach out to us at the R&D facility if you ever have any questions, or if you want to collaborate with us, we'll happily collaborate as well.
Yeah. I can't tell you how many times that I've brought over a brewer that was just trying to get his foot in the door, and he just started a brewery or whatever. And I would take him over to Little Italy, and we'd go to the back, and Chris or you were there, and so open with the knowledge, what you were brewing, how you were brewing it, what you were using. It was almost perplexing to even imagine that there's a sector of the industry where people are keeping secrets. It's just like,
not here,
and it exists, but that's not what's gonna make great beer become greater beer. So, dude, I'm really excited about everything that you guys have done down at Little Italy. But this kind of release, this Big Gus, Wee Gus release, really, really kind of puts the R&D facility, us as a whole, but the R&D facility on a pedestal, because this is what's going on. This is our thought process. This is how we look at innovation. And you're not brewing things for the sake of brewing them. You're brewing them for the sake of figuring out if it works. And that's awesome. That's the whole brewing spirit.
Well, the beer was founded at the R&D facility, not in a boardroom.
Yep.
Ooh.
Period.
Yeah, it's funny that we settled on lawnmower beer. Coming back full circle. It's like it's beer that we want to drink. Like it's San Diego. You're sitting at home and maybe you're mowing the lawn or it's warm out it's 75 degrees today. It's just turned March. You live around here, you kind of gravitate towards beers that are fitting for being out in the sun a little bit. It's a good for us as for me as an R&D brewer, it's a cool hybrid of a beer that suits where we live, a beer that suits it's the people like hops, we like hops. But it's also a really interesting technical challenge to make a beer that looks like this. So it's a really cool hybrid of those two things. That it's a beer that we like to drink, but it also requires some R&D.
Oh yeah, and a lot of R&D, and there's so many things about, for instance, Wee Gus. There's so many things about it that it's not on the can, but it's 96 calories. I know my lady loved that. As soon as I told her that, she was like, well, this is really good. I'm like, hey, by the way, do you know how many calories it has? And it just made it went from a great beer to have in the fridge once in a while to a beer that we need to have in the fridge all the time. And it's little subtleties like that. Some of them are a side effect of other processes, but like Chris, what you just said is dead on. We're brewing for us, and we live in a community. So just by association, we're brewing for the community. And this is a beautiful showcasing of what is possible and what our new owners are down with. They're like, huh? No, nobody brews that. Let's go ahead and go to market with it. All right, that's quite the gamble.
Yeah, they were awesome about this whole project. They're totally open-minded, and it's great. I mean, it's awesome that we made this happen in under a year.
Under a year.
Well, this is definitely not a seltzer, you guys, and I appreciate your time, and I appreciate you guys sitting with me again and letting everybody know exactly the ins and outs of not only what you do, but when you produce something or when we roll out with something, what it actually is. There's a lot to that transparency in the beer and in the information behind it. There's a sense of trust that you can develop when the people behind the brand or the product don't have any secrets, and we're just telling you how it's brewed, and we're telling you how it's made and what philosophy we have behind it. So that's kind of cool.
Transparency. I like the pun. Just like I said,
definitely intended.
Yeah. And I want to throw this one in here. In a world of hazies, this is a moment of clarity. How about that?
Oh, one upper.
Face bomb. I saw a face bomb. Ouch.
Dude, that's they should have that at on a wooden sign that you can hang in your kitchen.
There's so many puns for clarity and transparency.
Yeah.
Well, dude, I did that whole mix thing, the half and half, and it's awesome. Game changer. Like you start off with the wheeze, then you go into half and half, and then I end my night with the big. That's a good day of living.
Yeah, I would say I would even encourage, because it's so spritzy and just light bodied. Make a beer mosa. Just saying, like a beer mosa, or even like a I don't know, a bloody beer. I think it could be a good base for a bloody beer.
Definitely the balance that you guys have struck with all of the flavor components, but specifically the hop component that could be the dominating force on some of these beers is very tamed, and it plays along with probably everything that you throw at it. So well-constructed beer, gentlemen. Lightest beer that we've ever made. Spritzy, refreshing, and I don't have anything bad to say about this beer. It's the artwork is insane. Shout out to Paul.
The artwork is
Yeah.
great. Yeah, the artwork is really Paul did a standout job with these. He always does, but these are the artwork's great.
You know what we should do is we should put a link to a little clip of Paul. I would love to hear his take on the artwork behind the beer, because I know that he thinks about these things in a very different process. So we should probably post up a link to Paul talking about his innovation and his thought process when it came to creating the artwork for Big and Wee Gus. So we'll probably have that in the link somewhere, and I'll have our producer put it up, because it's listening to Paul explain why he's drawing these things is just as cool as listening to you guys explain why you're brewing them. So complete art, people. That's what we're doing, right? Art inside and outside. And thank you guys so much again. And thank you for a beer that I can actually drink all day and wake up feeling at least okay.
I'm going to be doing yard work now.
At least okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
get to cutting the lawn, Aaron. You already made you said it too loud, buddy.
Yeah.
We started fairly early, but I can have another Wee Gus, right?
Yeah, there you go. Cheers, you guys. Let's put this up right there. I want a nice little boom.
I ran out again.
It's okay, buddy. That means it's good. All right, guys. That was amazing. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share the rest of our episodes on Ballast Point's YouTube page, channel, whatever. You can follow us on ballastpoint.com, Instagram, Facebook, all that jam. I'll see you next time, and thanks for tuning in.